Greetings all. Welcome to another session here of Tuzi Talks. Today we're going to be looking again at curriculum design, and specifically this time we're going to be looking at goals, content, and sequencing. Much of this comes out of the Nation and McAllister text, Language Curriculum Design. But really when you look at this chapter, we're really looking at basically the scope and sequence preparation, setting up the scope and sequence in a course. And you should already know that a scope and sequence, where you've listed the items that you're going to be covering as far as the depth of them, and then across you have the sequence of how they're going to be done. That's generally how a scope and sequence type of thing works. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. They've set it up a little differently. Again, in their textbook, they're going to be focusing on this area of their diagram with regard to language curriculum design. We're dealing with the goals, the content, and sequencing. So goals is the centerpiece, and then content and sequencing is this one down here. Throughout this little lecture, we're going to be talking about how you decide the content and the sequencing. We'll talk about goals and the progression of units. We'll talk a little bit about how you set up your sequence, if it's linear or spiral, or the couple others that we'll look at. Now, that's what we're going to try to cover today. We begin by deciding what the content ought to be, and first we ought to go through this little checklist to make sure that everything jives and to help us get a little quicker gauge as to what we should be choosing for the particular course. Look at the environment, first of all. The ideas should help learning. It should fit for their age. It should fit for their proficiency, their expectations, and their interests. So when you go to look at what you're going to be picking, you need to look out all those things. The environment they're coming into, the content needs to kind of fit that particular content. You also need to look at your teachers. Will they be able to perform these particular materials and or be a good model for the content that's there? Interesting thing about ESL or TESL, TESOL, we as teachers need to know the language. We need to know not only the narrative aspects of it, the literature ends of it, but more importantly, we need to know the science of it, the linguistics of the language. At the same time, the content is going to be different. It can be the language, it can be literature, but it could also be math. It could be history or economics or science. And so a good language teacher is going to have feet in multiple areas of discipline so that they know what that content is. It doesn't always happen that way, but it's interesting that that's kind of what we have to do as language teachers, especially if we're dealing with English as a second language. Okay, so that's teachers. Look at the situation. How much time do you have for your particular objectives? Will they match? Will the students, by the time they get to the end of the particular course, will they be able to accomplish the goals that you're going to be setting up? Make sure that it's also practical. Stuff they can use immediately. Make it useful for them. Look at the needs. The goals that we set up should satisfy the learner's wants, needs, and lacks, as we talked about in an earlier lecture. So make sure that you're setting up things that are actually going to be beneficial for the learners as they go through the process. Finally, look at the goals. Okay, the goals should focus on language. Bear in mind that your students may want to look at content. They may want to play a game. Your goals are going to be language focused, so that they're learning the language. So make sure that the goals that you set up, that you set them on language or a skill or a database. And you should identify what those language ideas and skills are and what they're going to be focusing on. You may also want to show them to your students. Your students may be interested. There are some students who are wanting to learn language, and so they're going to be interested in gaining some knowledge within that field. Units of progression. After we look at the checklist, we want to recognize that there are different ways to progress from week to week to week, from unit to unit, from idea to idea. We're not talking about one course or one class. We're talking about a group of courses or the whole schedule in a course. Okay, we're moving from unit to unit, from group to group. There are different ways to organize these units. You can organize them as separate entities so that they're like a field. They're a separate entity. It's all by itself. So we can talk about survival English. Or we can talk about, going to the post office, and that's a separate entity all by itself. Traveling, from flying from one place to another, and the language involved in that. That's a separate unit all by itself. There's no progression or anything. That's just a field based of a unit type. You can also have series, where you're going from one area to another, one sequence into another element of that same sequence. Vocabulary is a great example. The highest frequency vocabulary is what you should normally focus on. And so this means that you're going to be dealing with your basic vocabulary, and you're gradually going to progress to the more difficult vocabulary that's within that high frequency list. It's a series, or you're going from one to the next to the next. The same would be true for grammar, that you're going to move from one field to the next. So there's two different types here. There's the series, and then there's the field. Okay, and here's some examples down here with regard to the different types that are there. You can look at the skills also as a series. We'll take a quick look at that over here as far as some examples. We've got vocabulary, high frequency vocabulary. Don't teach bound sets, again, like antonyms, up and down. Don't teach them at the same time, because generally it causes more confusion with students than helps them to remember. Also, you should be teaching vocabulary learning strategies. This, in actuality, is not a series. This belongs down here under a strategy, but it's good to be teaching them together as you do this. The same thing with grammar. You teach high-frequency grammar. Which grammars are used most often? And those are the ones that you probably want to front. They may not be the easiest, but you probably want to front those. The next thing that you'd want to work on are the simple grammars. Grammars that are going to be easier for students to learn because there are fewer requirements. Okay? And at the same time, you're going to want to go work on your grammar mastery skills so that you can understand faster. The 4 skills, I can do the same thing. I teach the high-frequency skills first with regard to listening, speaking, reading, and writing. I want to be able to focus on those skills that are going to be used most often. Push those front. Make those go first. And at the same time, you want to work on strategies to help people understand and appropriate those skills as they're going along. Go from simple to complex. Okay. Field ideas would be things like perceived needs. Someone says, well, I need to study vocabulary. I need to study grammar. Okay, find that need and you can fill that in. Ideas would be as well, interesting ideas. Things that they want to study. It may be that they like studying fish, so we study fish. I had a student who loved to study weather. Wasn't something that he was going to necessarily go into, but he wanted to study weather. Okay, so that's an area that I could go into. That's just a separate thing, right? Academic fields. I could break into a variety of those fields. By the way, those fields may be sequential in nature, but as I'm teaching language, I don't necessarily have to have it in a sequential form. I could teach survival English. I could teach cultural elements in the course. The different aspects of culture within a culture, within a language. Okay, and then I can teach strategies. So there are 2 different ways to do this. In all likelihood, you're going to be mixing them. You're going to have some that are field. You're going to have some that are series. All right, let's jump into task-based language teaching. Task-based language teaching is, I would say, relatively new, but it's actually maybe coming up to almost 20 years old. This idea where we focus on the task and not so much on the grammar, and not even so much on the communication. The objective here is to complete the task. The focus is not language or communication, but the task to be completed. Primarily focuses on meaning and the successful completion of the task. So, students in a task-based language teaching course are not necessarily focusing on a particular field or a particular series. This philosophy stresses the need for completing the task. Now, there are, small note here, a task is an activity which requires learners to use language with an emphasis on meaning to attain the objective. So the goal here is to finish the objective. The goal is not necessarily to learn language, although you will need language to complete the task. You see, the focus is a little different. That's the main difference there, and there are definitely pluses and minuses to such a philosophy of language teaching. Okay, Note, regardless of the approach, linguistic units of progression should be incorporated into courses. And we'll talk about this in just a minute. Task-based language teaching is not necessarily going to focus on the series of vocabulary or a series of grammar. They're focused on getting the task completed. And the task would be much more field type of unit progression as opposed to series type of unit progression. Some of the issues that go along with task-based is that it's trying to move away from a focus on language. There are others who are and they're the minors, by the way. The minor task-based language people out there are still saying, okay, well, we can incorporate this into the other elements. But then you have the people who are more strict, and they're saying, let's just walk away from the emphasis on language altogether. Let's focus on the task. Again, pluses and minuses. All right. As I mentioned before, we're really talking about scope and sequence, where we have this list of things that we want to cover, and then we walk across and say, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to teach these things in what type of a progression? You can do a linear. You begin with simple, and you move on to complex. Okay, there's no returning to already learned material, or there's no accounting for absenteeism. Somebody's gone, well, they miss it. I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to get back to it. Okay. It's also not in line with current research. Current research indicates that you ought to have some type of spaced regression, spaced repetition, so that you can go back and get it again. Spiral is going to do that more. It's going to be able to cover high-frequency vocabulary, high-frequency grammar multiple times. So you practice it once, and you go over it again, and you go over it again. And that's going to be more of a spiral approach. I would typically combine the two. Kind of like a slinky type of thing, where you're reviewing, but you're also going back and getting stuff that's done before. So it's more like a slinky type of an idea. Spiral is probably the best one to have. Matrix, you can also cover multiple things. You also have opportunities to revise, but they're more separate type of entities. Then you also have field, where you're separating everything into separate little things. You can start anywhere, you can end anywhere, but you're still going to cover all the intended elements regardless of where you begin. For example, an example of this would be extensive graded reading. With an extensive graded reading system, you've got 100, 200 graded readers, and the students come in the middle. It doesn't matter. They begin with any book that they want to take, and they begin reading. They can track their progress. And they just continue reading, and they continue reading at that level, or they begin to move up slightly. They're still going to be able to cover the vocabulary at that level, and they're still going to be able to move up to a higher level. With an extensive graded reading system, there is no you must begin here, you must end here type of thing. That doesn't exist. So that would be that. In modular, we're talking about independent modules not tied together. So for example, survival English would be an example where you don't necessarily have to have any of them connected. But if someone's learning just the survival English to go on a vacation, for example, they're going to some country and they need to learn enough to be able to get into the hotel, go to a restaurant, get in a taxi, and that's all they're learning. Well, then we can probably go do that with more of a modular approach. Strategies would be another one that would be more of a modular approach. That's basically what's covered in here. I wanted to go out and show you some examples of a scope and sequence. If you're going to be dealing with a program, be it at a school or something that you need to set up yourself, it should have a scope and sequence. And the more detail you provide in the scope and sequence, the easier it will be for teachers to appropriate that when they go to create a syllabus or the guide for the course. So I would recommend that you provide as much detail as possible so that teachers know what's going to be expected in the course. Additionally, you can give these guides to students, and then students can see what's going to be expected in the course. Here's an example that I found on the web, and I'm just going to run through a bunch of examples. None of these are mine. This is a scope and sequence, and you can see some of the things that are going on here. We've got a trimester, and within this particular course, we're dealing with fiction, and we're working with this question, do you find or create your true selves? This seems to me not language related necessarily. You've got reading. Here are the reading things that you're going to be doing. You're going to be reading things like Harry Potter, freak the mighty, which I have no idea what that is, Bridge to Terabithia. As I look at these, okay, I don't know what level ESL 2 is, but these seem to be rather middle of the road type of stories, and I don't know if the vocabulary is going to be there because I don't see a list of vocabulary. Somewhere in here they ought to have that, but I can certainly go to something like Hatchet or Bridge to Terabithia and do a word count, do a word analysis to find out if these words are in the right area. Wasn't done here with this one. Listening and speaking, idioms, character interview. Okay, that's something that we can now measure. Panel discussions, judging America. This definitely seems to be rather high-level things that are going on here. There are no specific speaking skills here that are listed. There are activities that they're going to complete, but there are no specific skills. Let's move on to writing. Writing process. Well, that may be something that they're learning. They're going to learn the writing process. That's something that's measurable. I don't know if it's the writing process for writing an essay or a poem or a short story. I don't know what that is. Getting ready to write. Again, here's materials they're going to cover. Review the parts of speech. This, to me, seems rather low. I don't know what's going on there. Fundamentals of English. AZAR. I know who this is. This is a good textbook for learning grammar, and they're going through a variety of chapters. So this, of all these elements, is the most linguistic in nature, is the most tied to a scope and sequence. At the same time, I don't know what those 5 chapters are. So I'm going to have to go look up those 5 chapters to find out what they are. We go back to the writing one. We have paging, we have summaries, we have problem solutions, we have writing essays. Here we have other things that are also somewhat defined. Okay, so of the 4 elements that are listed here, at least 2 of them are somewhat defined. They're going to be learning how to write an essay. They're going to be learning how to do problem solving. They're going to be learning how to write summaries. Okay, so 2 of these. You can look at more of these if you're interested, but it's the same type of thing with this series. And again, I just want to show you more examples. Here's an example of a scope and sequence that I actually found that has nothing to do with language learning and teaching, but you can see how for every quarter they have a topic, they have chapters that they're going to be studying, and so they're working through as we go here so that we know what's going on. That's what kind of a scope and sequence would look like. Here's a place I found online called Time for Learning, and you can see as we look at the examples here for first grade, they got 392 activities. Okay, so we have language arts activities. This is not necessarily for ESL, but it is language arts activities. And we can go down and look at some of these activities. Phoneme isolation, phonics. Okay, we can see more here that's more language-based. So here we're trying to decode things. Okay, let's go further down here. High-frequency words. High-frequency words again. And so you see that within this curriculum, the scope and sequence is trying to literally break down which week do we do which activities. That may be too much for your organization, for your school. But here we're saying a little more detail as to what things ought to be taught, and not just, hey, we're going to do this activity. Okay. Again, we're missing a lot of stuff here. We're really only looking at activities, although we do see some things involved here in this quote-unquote lesson. It would be better to have it labeled out, written out, so that we could see everything and see the whole plan as it moved along. Let's take a look at another one. Here's a curriculum for Fair Lawn School District. Here's the curriculum. Here's the scope and sequence. Look at kindergarten. Here are the A, B, C, D, F, G, H items that are going to be doing. Look, our classroom, who works at school, what happens at school. Okay, so this is very topic-based. There's no grammar, there's no vocabulary, there's no reading and writing here at all. I have no idea what else is going on. I only know that I'm going to be dealing with these areas, which means I need to devise what vocabulary I'm going to be covering. Is it going to be high-frequency vocabulary? I don't know. The school has not provided it. What materials will I be using? I don't know. The school has not designated it. This is woefully inadequate if you're trying to build a scope and sequence. A scope and sequence is not only supposed to describe all the elements that you're going to be covering, but also at what levels and what times you're going to be covering them, or what courses you're going to be covering them. So this is not a format that you're going to want to use. This is a format that comes out of a textbook. And I believe this is a Cambridge textbook. And so we have Unit 1, Back to School. Again, that's a topic. Lesson 1, Classmates. In function, introducing yourself. And so here, these guys are actually trying to introduce a function. They're going to try to introduce grammar, and they're going to try to introduce vocabulary. They're at least trying to set up the scope and sequence. Okay, now, they don't tell you what the vocabulary is. They don't tell you what the grammar is, other than the question. They do tell you what a topic is, and what the function is that they're going to try to do. Okay, so at least they're now trying to build this scope and sequence in such a way. They don't have as much detail as you want, but they're beginning to go in the route that you ought to be going into. This is the Mount Laurel, New Jersey English as a Second Language curriculum. Let's see if we can walk down and see some of the stuff that's here. One of the things that they're working with is the WIDA standard. And the WIDA standard is a national standard for evaluating and helping or setting up a curriculum. It's used in New Jersey. I do know that's also used in Pennsylvania. And so there are definitely advantages to this standard. They do have proficiency tests. They are used, and then they're also used as guides for the courses. So let's walk down a little more. We can look up WIDA, and I would definitely recommend that you do. Here are the 5 levels, actually the 6 levels that they have, and you'll note that they have words that they've defined for them all. Probably a good idea for you to do if you're building a curriculum. If you're going to build a curriculum, and this one has 6 levels, bloop, right? This one has 6 levels here, and they're going to be going across with all the things that need to be covered within those 6 levels. Within this system, you may want to add just names for these levels so that you can understand which ones are which, and you're going to break everything down. So they're trying to show you here, for example, in developing general and specific language area content areas, expanded sentence in oral and written paragraphs. So now see right here, they're only working in paragraphs. In writing as well, okay? Oral and written language with phonological, syntactic and semantic errors may impede the common communication of its meaning when presented with oral or written narrative or expository description with occasional visual graphic support. Here they're trying to describe for you what this level is. This is very good. This is very good because it's trying to describe what each level is. When you begin to try to test and or put people or move people through, these are the types of things, these definitions, these descriptions are going to help students and teachers know where everything belongs, what you're covering where. So this is a good example that they've done here. Here are some, these are based off of the WIDA standards, right? These are aligned with the WIDA standards for New Jersey. And so they have the standard, they have the question, they have the learning outcomes, what are the goals that they're going to get out of this, and the activities that possibly there, materials, and evaluation and assessment. This is the best, by far, of all the systems that we've looked at so far, because they're trying to be detailed. They're trying to apply to a standard, and they're going to try to meet that standard. Don't know whether they're going to be able to do it in the time allotted, but that's what they're trying to do here. Here are your 5 WIDA standards, 6 WIDA standards. And again, you can go to this consortium and go look up this information if you want. I like this type of a system. It's organized, it's set up, and I can use it to build the curriculum and then, of course, my courses. Okay, this is now language arts, learning outcomes. These are writing standards. Okay, these are writing standards that we're looking at here. And these are speaking standards. Okay, so they've got standards for each one of them. They've got some type of test that for each one of them, some way to evaluate, and so they're walking through each one of these. Very nicely done this way. Here is for speaking. Here are, again, the measurements for what is required for that particular level. Again, level 3, retell short story narratives through pictures. Read sentences from rhymes. Answer explicit questions from short stories. You see what they're doing now. Okay, so if you can do this, you belong at this level. If you can't do this, okay, then you're going to be at different levels. So they're setting up the levels because they know all the materials that need to be covered, and they're trying to break them down into levels so they can teach them according to that level. Each level needs to be completable, right, by the end of a course or by the end of a program. Okay, and then this is for listening, and then this is all of them together, right? Great setup here. This is the kind of thing that you want to set up if you're going to have a curriculum for use, at your school. If you don't have one, this is the type of thing you want to set up, so that you know that at each level you're going to be able to be attacking these particular things. Now, let's just say, for example, at level 1, you got 2 courses. Okay, and maybe with one of them you focus on all input, the other one you focus on output. Or maybe you've got one where you focus on reading and writing, and you got another one where you focus on, speaking and listening. Right. Okay. And maybe within all of them you're working on the 2 databases. Maybe you have got 3 classes per level. It depends on how much time your students are going to need. Again, the thing that's not listed here within this WITA system is the grammar and the vocabulary. Right? Where is that information? Okay, this is grades 1 and 2. We're going to go back to the same things again if we do this. But this school, what is this, Mount Laurel Schools document is an excellent document for you to use to understand how to set up a curriculum. Okay, again, this is the Mount Laurel Township Schools. I don't know where I found this, somewhere online, but it's an excellent example of how a scope and sequence is supposed to be set up. You may want to go a little deeper when you give the scope and sequence, you give that to a teacher, right? Let's jump down there. You give them something like this, or you give them level 1 everything. You give them level 2 everything because they're teaching level 2. You give them level 2 reading, writing, listening, speaking, grammar, and vocabulary, and then they can take that and say, okay, I'm going to build a course. I can't do all of these things, but I'm going to do, the first 5, or I'm going to do the middle 5. I can't do all, 500 words that are all within this level. I'm going to do 200 of them. And let somebody else do another 200 so that you can all work together. You now know what you can do with this package of requirements. Now, you may want to teach about bugs. You may want to teach about, tap dancing. That's fine. The content is going to be something that you and your students are going to pick out. But you know what they're supposed to be mastering with regard to the skills in the databases because you have this scope and sequence set up. Okay? That's the important thing about this. I'm going to stop with that one. I think this WITA one is an excellent one. I do hope this has helped. And if you do have any questions about sequencing, about a scope and sequence, about selecting your content and putting in, the series progressions as well as the field progressions, kindly let me know. Leave a message down here below. And I hope to see you later. Bye-bye.